There are two methods to integrate demand base with Adobe Analytics. In this tutorial, I'll be showing you how to use version 2 of the demand base custom data connector to integrate demand base with Adobe Analytics. Before we begin, you'll first want to make sure that you actually have version 2 of the custom data connector already in your data connector wizard, right here. Once you confirm that you have the connector already, you'll then want to add a new report suite in which we'll be pushing the demand base data. For the purposes of this tutorial, I'll just be naming this report suite test. Once you've created the report suite, we can then begin configuring the integration. The first step is to make sure that you have a name and an email address associated with the report suite. If you need a description for it, you can certainly use that as well. However, for this tutorial, I'm going to leave that blank. The next important step is to make sure to insert your demand base API key. Here, I have one already available, but if you don't have one, you can reach out to your demand base CSM or demand base implementation engineer to receive this information. Finally, for step 1, we'll want to confirm whether or not we'll be sending this data to Adobe Target. If you're using Adobe Target for your personalization efforts, you want to select true, but I won't be, so I'll just continue on to the next step. In step 2, we'll want to determine which EVARs we'll actually want to be pushing this data to. Version 2 of the demand base custom data connector allows you 2 EVARs to push demand base data to. Here, I'm just going to select EVAR 1 and EVAR 2 in my setup. If you'd like to rename the Site Catalyst metric, you can check the boxes here and rename them however you want. When we move on to the next step, you'll notice that EVAR 2 does not have custom names for the actual dimensions. This is because we need to determine how we want to name them in the reporting suite. Now this will be determined by how we actually set up the integration in the first place. So if we move back to step 1, we'll actually notice that we did not enter any information into these 8 boxes here. These 8 boxes are to define which demand base variables are going to be pushed into the reporting suite. Luckily, I have a set of dimensions already set up in another reporting suite that I'm going to just copy over into these boxes right here. Now, what you enter into these 8 boxes will obviously depend on what demand base data you actually want to use. So if you're not using state or city, but rather instead zip code and phone, then you'll want to change these dimension names to zip and phone, for instance. Please note that the naming convention for these attributes is very important. If you misspell one letter in any one of these dimensions, then your data may not flow properly into your Adobe Analytics. Now, once we've finished adding the actual dimensions into step 1 of the integration settings, then we can move back into step 3 and then begin naming these attributes or dimensions inside the actual reporting suites. In step 1, we defined which attributes to grab or which dimensions to grab from the demand base API response. But in step 3 here in the data settings, we actually want to name them something useful that we'll use in our reporting suite. So for instance, before we saw that we have Fortune 1000 in dimension number 1. Well, it might make sense to name the dimension Fortune space 1000 in the actual reporting suite, and so on and so forth. Now, you can technically name these however you want, but the recommendation is to make them as clear as possible. I'm going to spend some time filling out the rest of these dimensions. Now, if you'd like to rename the particular rule sets that we have here defined in these classifications, then you'll want to check this box and rename them as necessary. Once you've finished, we can then save and continue to the next step. Here we see an option to create a dashboard. This is not necessary, so I'll continue to step number 5, where we review the integration. In step number 5, you'll see a summary of all the configuration settings that we've set up to this point. You'll see not only the custom values for the second evar here, but also the API key along with some of the classification rule sets as well. When you've confirmed that these all look correct to you, you can then go ahead and activate the integration to finish.